The wedding album lay open on Aunt Lucille's polished coffee table, a glossy monument to betrayal. My fingers hovered above its pages, trembling as I stared at the man beaming in the center of the photograph. My brother, Caleb, standing beside his new wife. The same brother whose wedding I thought was happening tomorrow. Sweetheart, I thought you knew. Aunt Lucille's voice broke behind me, soaked in something heavier than pity. The crystal frame I'd brought as a gift slipped from my hands. The crash echoed through the quiet living room, shards scattering like the pieces of something deep inside me that had just splintered. Afternoon sunlight streamed through her bay windows, catching the glass, making it sparkle as if mocking me. "That's not possible," I said, my voice sounding far away even to me. "I have the invitation right here." My hands fumbled inside my purse until they found the thick cream envelope. My name was written in perfect calligraphy, the date printed in elegant gold. June 18th. Tomorrow. Aunt Lucille's hands shook as she took the card from me, her reading glasses slipping to the tip of her nose. "Oh, Naomi," she paused, her voice splintering. "The wedding was last weekend." I blinked. The words didn't fit together. "They sent you the wrong date on purpose." The room tilted. My breath caught in my chest as I thought of the weeks I'd spent hunting for the perfect dress, the hours rehearsing polite conversations with relatives who barely spoke to me, the days imagining that maybe, just maybe, this wedding meant things could change. Instead, all I could hear now was the shatter of glass on hardwood. The air felt heavier, as if every breath I took was pressing down on my ribs. I stared at the invitation in Aunt Lucille's hand. Its gold embossing gleamed in the sunlight, but now it felt like a cruel joke wrapped in elegance. I remembered the moment it had arrived. Standing by my mailbox, the late afternoon light warming my skin, hope rising in my chest as I ran my fingers over the raised letters of my name. I had smiled for hours that day, believing the invitation meant I was wanted. 2 months ago, at the family dinner where Caleb announced his engagement, his eyes had skimmed the room, meeting everyone's gaze but mine. Still, I'd forced a smile, offering congratulations like it didn't sting. That weekend, I'd driven across the city to 3 different boutiques, searching for a dress that would whisper "I belong here" without being too loud about it. I could still see my reflection in the shop mirror that day, hair styled, cheeks flushed with excitement, the saleswoman complimenting my glow. I'd believed it was joy. Now, kneeling on Aunt Lucille's hardwood floor, I began gathering shards of the broken crystal frame. My hands shook, the jagged edges catching the light as I dropped them into a crumpled piece of gift wrap. "Let me help you," Aunt Lucille said, bending down. I shook my head, my voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. "No. Let me do it." They'd always treated me as if I were invisible. Today they made it official. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to make excuses for their cruelty. I didn't reach for explanations that might soften the blow. Something deep inside me shifted. And I knew, this was only the beginning. Aunt Lucille's eyes brimmed as she wrung her hands, her knuckles pale. "I fought with your mother about this," she said finally. "Told her it was wrong, cruel, but she wouldn't listen. She said you'd bring up uncomfortable topics, ask questions no one wanted to answer." I almost laughed. Uncomfortable topics like the tens of thousands I'd poured, quietly and without acknowledgement, into keeping the family's lakeside retreat from being seized by the bank. Or the time I covered the property taxes after Dad's company forgot to pay them. Embarrassing questions, like why Caleb's constant string of failed ventures was always forgiven while my own successes were dismissed as luck or overcompensation. I'd spent years, decades really, trying to prove I deserved my place in the family. Giving more. Hoping one day they'd see me not just as a relative, but as someone worth loving. I wrapped the broken shards in the cheerful wrapping paper I'd picked out for the gift. A mockery now, its bright colors disguising something sharp enough to cut. Aunt Lucille reached for my hand. Her skin was soft and cool, her voice gentle. "Some people can't see what's right in front of them, Naomi. Not won't, can't." Her words landed like truth, heavy and immovable. No achievement would ever be enough. No sacrifice would make them truly see me. I'd been trying to earn what should have been freely given, measuring my worth by standards they'd set to ensure I'd always fail. I looked down at the album again, at all those smiling faces so easily celebrating without me. My absence hadn't been a mistake to them. It had been the plan all along. The thought settled in my chest like a stone. They hadn't just forgotten me. They'd erased me deliberately, efficiently, as though my presence would have contaminated their joy. I stared at the album one last time before closing it with a firm snap. They made their choice, Aunt Lucille, I said quietly. It's time I made mine. The next day I sat in my car at the edge of my parents' circular driveway, the engine idling. The Tudor-style house stood immaculate, its manicured hedges and gleaming windows reflecting the afternoon sun. Picture of perfection. Why? Through the wide bay window I could see them. My parents relaxed in the living room, glasses in hand, surrounded by framed wedding photos. My mother's delicate laugh floated out through the partially open window, the same sound I'd spent my childhood chasing like a prize I could never quite win. Caleb stood by the mantel, holding up a large wedding portrait as though it were a crown jewel. His voice carried, sharp and unfiltered. Best decision we made was making sure she wasn't there to ruin everything, like always. The words hit with a force no slap could match. I gripped the doorframe so tightly my knuckles whitened. My stomach churned. They laughed. They flipped pages. They didn't even glance toward the window, didn't even suspect I was watching. 3 full minutes passed before my mother's gaze landed on me, standing in the entryway. She didn't gasp. She didn't smile. She simply said my name, flat and toneless, as though announcing an unwelcome guest. Naomi. No question. No greeting. Just the acknowledgement of an intrusion. And I knew, the next words I spoke would change everything. The wedding was last weekend, I said, my voice steadier than the chaos swirling inside me. You sent me the wrong date, on purpose. Caleb didn't even look up from the album. I needed one perfect day without you. No denial. No attempt to pretend. Just a simple truth tossed out like it meant nothing. My mother adjusted the pearls at her neck. A nervous habit I'd recognized since childhood. You've always disrupted our peace, Naomi. We just needed one special occasion without your intensity. Her tone was almost gentle, as though she were explaining why a beloved family pet had to be put down. My father sat silent in his leather chair, eyes fixed on his hands. His stillness wasn't neutrality, it was endorsement. Years of it. I stepped farther into the room, acutely aware that they were seated, comfortable, while I stood. The dynamic wasn't new, it had been this way my entire life. I've poured thousands into repairing the lakeside retreat, I said evenly. Through my holding company. Did you think I wouldn't find out you've been telling everyone it's still completely yours? My mother waved a dismissive hand. That's what successful children do, they help their parents. It's your obligation. Caleb smirked, dropping the album onto the coffee table. Dad built something tangible. I create architectural visions. What do you make, Naomi, besides money? Their words settled in my bones like ice. They didn't see me as a daughter. Not as a sister. I was a bank, an asset. A convenient safety net with feelings they preferred to ignore. And something in me, something that had bent for years, began to straighten. Dangerously straight. My gaze drifted to the ornate mirror above the fireplace. The woman staring back at me was a stranger. Shoulders curved inward, chin slightly tucked, as if she'd been trained to make herself smaller. A permanent posture of apology. How long had I been living in that skin? I reached into my bag and pulled out a slim folder I'd taken from my home office before driving over. The leather was warm from my grip, my thumb resting on the edge like a trigger. Let me remind you of something, I said, stepping closer to the coffee table. Every repair on the cottage. Every tax bill paid. Every loan to keep it afloat. I have it all documented. My mother's eyes narrowed, the first flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. And most importantly, I continued, my voice gaining weight, I have my name on the deed. Not as co-owner, as sole owner. I placed the document on the table with deliberate care. 3 years ago, you signed over your half to my company when Caleb needed capital for that restaurant he ran into the ground. My father finally looked up, his expression caught between confusion and dawning comprehension. You're welcome to contest it, I said, but the paperwork is airtight. My attorney made sure of it. Your attorney? My mother's voice rose an octave. You mean Jenna? Our family attorney. My attorney now, I corrected, sliding the folder toward them. 15 minutes later, I was walking back to my car. My hands trembled, but my steps were steady. For the first time since opening that cursed wedding album, I felt anchored. They had taken my place in the family. I had taken their illusion of control. That same afternoon, my phone buzzed for the 5th time in under an hour. Another concerned cousin, one I hadn't heard from since last Thanksgiving, suddenly eager to check on my mental health. "Your mother's been worried sick," Uncle Harris's voice crackled through the line. "Says you've been making some wild accusations." I pinched the bridge of my nose. Did she mention they sent me a fake wedding invitation with the wrong date? The pause on the other end told me everything. Well, there must be some misunderstanding. "No misunderstanding," I cut in. "They didn't want me there, so they made sure I wouldn't be." After hanging up, I opened my laptop. Caleb's social media page was flooded with wedding photos. One in particular stopped me cold. Our parents beaming, standing on either side of the happy couple. Beneath it, his caption read, "Surrounded by everyone who matters." The absence I'd ignored in family photos all my life now screamed at me. The next blow arrived by mail. A formal letter on my father's business letterhead demanding I return the cottage to its rightful owners, as if I'd stolen it rather than saved it. That night, I lay awake, photographs spread across my bedspread. Faces smiled back at me, each one a reminder of my foolish hope, that these moments had meant something. At 3 a.m., my hand hovered over my phone, my mother's contact glowing on the screen. An apology from me could restore peace, their peace. I set the phone down. Instead, I opened a blank spreadsheet and began documenting every unpaid loan, every temporary transfer that was never returned, every repair they'd sworn they'd handle. Each entry became a brick. I was finally building a wall. Tuesday afternoon, a knock at my office door broke the quiet hum of my concentration. Aunt Lucille stepped in, balancing 2 paper bags from my favorite deli. "Thought you might be skipping lunch," she said, setting one in front of me. She placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, her turquoise rings catching the light. "I'm proud of you, Naomi. It's about time someone in this family had the courage to stop playing their game." The simple touch almost undid me. Before I could respond, my assistant's voice came over the intercom. "Ms. Rowan, your parents are in the lobby. No appointment." Aunt Lucille's hand tightened on my shoulder. "Want me to stay?" I straightened my spine. "No. I need to handle this myself." When they entered, my mother's eyes shimmered with perfectly contained tears. Not a single streak of mascara out of place. "How could you abandon your family?" she began. "We've always been there for you." My father stood beside her, rigid, his voice clipped. "The cottage has been in our family for generations. You have no right." They remained standing, I stayed seated. No more leaping to my feet when they walked into a room. "That cottage hasn't been in our family for years," I said. "You sold your half to my company when you needed money for Caleb's failed restaurant. April 2018. Your signatures are right here." My mother's tears vanished as quickly as they'd appeared. "We did no such thing." I slid the document across my desk. "You assumed I'd give it back without mentioning the transfer. Or maybe you assumed I'd keep bankrolling this family while being excluded from it." The words felt lighter than air as they left my mouth. For the first time in decades, I wasn't apologizing. For the first time in my life, I saw something in my mother's eyes that wasn't disappointment. It was fear. "I've made myself clear," I said, my voice steady. The intercom buzzed. "Ms. Rowan, Jenna Marks is here for your 2 o'clock. Perfect timing. Jenna strode in, her navy suit as sharp as her tone. "Mr. and Mrs. Rowan, our meeting is over." She gestured toward the door with the ease of someone who had escorted far more intimidating people out of far more intimidating rooms. "This is family business," my mother hissed. "Which is why Ms. Marks, my attorney, is here," I replied. "All further communication will go through her office." The contrast was almost cinematic. Jenna's respectful Ms. Rowan, against my mother's clipped, dismissive use of my first name. As Jenna guided them toward the exit, my father glanced back. The certainty that had always braced his shoulders was gone, replaced by something unsettled. When the door closed, Jenna returned with a stack of documents. "Ready to make this official?" I signed each page slowly, deliberately. With every stroke of the pen, my hand grew steadier. The final document was an eviction notice. They had 30 days to vacate the cottage. Signing it felt less like revenge and more like releasing a weight I'd carried since childhood. "Your mother's signature on the sale is ironclad," Jenna assured me, slipping the paperwork into her briefcase. "They have no legal ground to stand on." As she spoke, my phone lit up. Caleb's name flashed across the screen, the first time he'd called in years. I watched it ring until it went silent. Some calls don't deserve to be answered. The next morning, the documents were spread across Thomas Blake's mahogany desk like a battle map. He was my financial advisor, and today we were dismantling every tether they still had to me. Joint accounts closed, he said, checking the first box on his list. Co-signed loans transferred. Investment portfolios separated. I signed each page with deliberate, measured strokes, the ink drying like a seal over the past. Perfect timing, Thomas added, glancing at the clock. Right about now, your parents should be halfway through their country club lunch. Your mother's on her second gin and tonic. Your father's pretending to listen to some retiree's fishing story. The predictability of their lives had become my advantage. What about the restraining order? I asked. Judge Halvorsen will review it this afternoon, Thomas replied, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. Your documentation is thorough. Unannounced workplace visits, public scenes, financial harassment. It's all here. You've built a solid case. I thought of the whispers in my office lobby, the way colleagues glanced away when my parents showed up. My fingers curled into a fist beneath the desk. I've seen families destroy people, Thomas said quietly. You're making the right choice. Before I could answer, my phone vibrated. The building's security line flashed across the screen. Ms. Rowan, the guard said, his voice low. There's a situation in the lobby. Your brother is demanding to see you. Thomas's eyes sharpened. Put it on speaker. Is he causing a disturbance? I asked. Yes, ma'am. Says it's about financial matters. We're documenting the incident for protocol. Thomas slid me a note in neat block letters. This helps the restraining order. I'm not coming down, I said calmly. Follow standard procedure for unauthorized visitors. And just like that, another tie began to fray. 15 minutes later, my phone rang again. An unfamiliar number this time. Naomi's Kara, Caleb's wife. Her voice wavered, carrying the tentative weight of someone approaching a closed door. I'm outside your building. I closed my eyes, bracing for another round of accusations. I saw everything, she continued. The way he acted in your lobby. But I had no idea he could be like that. Through my office window, I spotted her near the fountain, phone pressed to her ear, shoulders drawn tight against the spring breeze. Sunlight caught the diamond on her finger. Still bright, still new, but her eyes told a different story. He told me you refused to help with the wedding, she said, voice cracking. Said you were jealous of our happiness. That's why you weren't there. But that wasn't true, was it? You never even knew the real date. Her admission hung between us, fragile and dangerous. I'm sorry, she whispered. I should have asked why. I should have noticed. I studied her through the glass. 3 weeks married, and already she was seeing the man beneath the performance. Why are you telling me this? Asked finally. She hesitated. Because I recognized the look in his eyes today. It's the same look my father had before he threatened my mother. I'm not going to wait 30 years to admit what I'm seeing now. Something in her tone told me this wasn't just about me anymore. When the call ended, I sat for a long moment, torn between preserving the wall I'd built and allowing this one fragile bridge to remain. But I knew bridges could be traps just as easily as they could be escapes. That afternoon, Aunt Lucille appeared in my doorway again, but this time she wasn't carrying lunch. Instead, she set a weathered leather briefcase on my desk, its brass clasp clicking open like the start of a confession. I've been keeping these for years, she said, sliding out a stack of worn folders. I wasn't sure when, or if, you'd be ready to see them. Inside were neatly labeled envelopes. Emails, text messages, financial records. I began to read. Need more money for Caleb's startup. Naomi won't mind co-signing. Tell Naomi the cottage repairs are minimal. Don't mention the foundation cracks. She's coming for Thanksgiving. Hide the new boat until after she leaves. Each line landed like a blow, the casual cruelty of their plotting hitting harder than any single act of betrayal. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a pattern, deliberate, systematic, and sustained over years. Halfway through the second folder, Jenna arrived, scanning the pages with the quick efficiency of a litigator. Her expression tightened. This strengthens our case. Shows intent. The judge will see it for what it is. While Jenna selected key documents, Thomas called to confirm my accounts had new security protocols. They won't be able to touch a thing even if they somehow have your passwords, he assured me. For the first time in days, my chest loosened. These papers weren't just proof, they were armor. The following morning, Jenna's voice came through my phone, crisp and certain. The judge signed the restraining order. They can't come within 500 feet of your home or office. Effective immediately. I hung up, staring at the briefcase still on my desk. It seemed Aunt Lucille hadn't just brought me evidence. She brought me a weapon. The fallout began almost instantly. That afternoon, Aunt Lucille called again, her tone carrying a note of satisfaction. Your cousin Meredith just canceled her bridge game with your mother. Said she couldn't look her in the eye after what she's learned. One by one the dominoes tipped. Uncle Simon removed my parents from the holiday rotation. My grandmother's oldest friend declined their dinner invitation for the first time in 20 years. Rumors swirled that Kara had moved back in with her parents. Caleb's drinking escalated. Without her financial cushion, his stability began to crack like thin ice. Then the formal eviction notice for the cottage landed in their mailbox. That was when the reality of their situation began to sink in. I ran my finger over the embossed letterhead of my holding company. The same company that had bought the cottage 3 years earlier, when they could no longer afford the taxes. The property they still insisted was theirs. The truth has a way of revealing itself, not all at once but in slow, undeniable increments. A week later, the familiar morning sunlight streamed through the glass doors of my office building. Security guards Stan and Miguel exchanged knowing glances as they buzzed in 3 figures. My parents, flanking Pastor Roland. My mother's camel coat hung crooked on her shoulders, her hair showing stray strands out of place. My father's posture had shifted, his shoulders slightly bowed. Pastor Roland approached me first, Bible in hand, wearing the practiced expression of someone used to mediating at hospital bedsides and funerals. Naomi, your parents thought it might help to have someone neutral present. I didn't take his hand. There was nothing neutral about someone who had eaten at our Christmas table for 20 years. My mother stepped forward, her voice trembling with carefully measured fragility. We've been praying about this, Naomi, about your behavior lately. A bitter laugh slipped from my throat before I could stop it. My behavior? The cottage has been in our family for generations, my father said, his usual authority replaced with a faint, almost pleading note. Your grandfather built it with his own hands. Pastor Roland placed a hand lightly on my arm. Forgiveness is divine, Naomi. They're still your parents. There are bonds that transcend disagreements. Disagreements. I repeated, the word tasting like ash. Is that what we're calling deliberate cruelty now? My mother's eyes flicked toward the security desk, as if the congregation might materialize beside the potted palms. Families shouldn't air their difficulties in public. Think about what people at church will say. Something in me straightened. Did they mention I was promoted to creative strategy director last week? That my team just landed the largest account in the firm's history. The pastor blinked off script. That's wonderful news, Naomi. Congratulations. I reached into my leather portfolio and placed 2 envelopes on the reception counter. This is the invitation I received for Caleb's wedding, and this is the real one Aunt Lucille showed me afterward. His eyes moved between them, confusion creasing his forehead as he saw the dates. They sent me the wrong one, I said evenly. On purpose. To make sure I wouldn't be there. This isn't about the wedding, my mother interjected quickly. Oh, it's exactly about the wedding, I replied. Because it's the perfect symbol of every way you've erased me. I turned fully toward her, locking eyes. And for the first time I wasn't the one who looked away. I could feel the pastor's gaze flicking between us, searching for common ground that didn't exist. Perhaps, he began cautiously, sometimes families make difficult choices to maintain peace. I've spent my life maintaining peace, I cut in, turning the other cheek so often I've been spinning in circles. My voice didn't rise, but the weight behind it was enough to still the air in the lobby. I shifted my focus back to him. Did they tell you about the cottage? How I've been making the payments for 8 years while they pretended it was still theirs? Or about the endless loans for Caleb's failed ventures? Money that was never repaid? Or maybe they mentioned how they've conveniently forgotten to invite me to Thanksgiving 3 years in a row, but never forgot to call when they needed a new roof. The pastor's expression wavered. His certainty faltered as he glanced at my parents. "Naomi, after all we've sacrificed for you," my mother began, her tears finally threatening to fall. "Name one sacrifice you made for me that wasn't actually for Caleb." Silence stretched between us until it became their answer. I reached for a large manila envelope sitting on the desk and handed it to my father. "These are all the family photos I've kept over the years. The ones where I'm cropped halfway out or standing just far enough apart to be mistaken for a stranger. I've held on to them, thinking someday I might feel like I belonged in those frames." His fingers trembled as he took it. "I'm done," I said quietly but firmly. "I'm releasing myself from the obligation of being your daughter. You're free from pretending I matter to you." My mother's voice cracked. "You can't just stop being family." I met her eyes without flinching. "You already did." Stan, the security guard, stepped forward from behind his desk, his presence a quiet wall between me and the people who had raised me. "Everything all right here, Ms. Rowan?" "Yes, Stan," I said, my voice calm but unyielding. "My visitors were just leaving." "This isn't over, Naomi," my father muttered, clutching the envelope of photos like a shield. "Actually," I said, turning toward the elevator, "it already is." I didn't look back as the doors slid shut. The muffled sound of my mother's protests dissolved into the hum of the elevator, replaced by a sensation I could barely recognize: lightness. It spread through me, warming places I hadn't felt in years. 2 weeks later, news reached me through Aunt Lucille. Caleb had lost his job. Kara's return to her parents' house was no longer rumor. Financial pressure was squeezing him, and the cracks in their perfect facade were widening. I felt nothing more than a distant pity, the kind you feel for strangers you glimpse through a rain-streaked window. The following Tuesday, a letter arrived at my office. The envelope bore my father's precise handwriting, the same sweeping capitals I'd seen on birthday cards and checks. I placed it on my desk beside my coffee and studied it as steam curled upward. My finger traced the unbroken seal. Inside might be another manipulation. Another demand disguised as a plea for unity. Or perhaps something different entirely. I hadn't decided whether to open it yet. And the fact that I could decide, that it was my choice, was, perhaps, the most valuable thing I had gained. The power was no longer in their hands. A year later, the morning sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my lake house office, casting golden patterns across the hardwood floor. The air smelled faintly of cedar and fresh coffee. Photographs lined the walls, not of family gatherings or forced holiday smiles, but of landscapes I'd captured on weekends I'd chosen for myself. Mist rising from forest trails. Waves breaking against a rocky coastline. Moments that belonged entirely to me. No family portraits here. No reminders of battles I'd fought just to stand in the frame. My phone rang, and for the first time in years, my shoulders didn't tense at the sound. "Naomi Rowan," I answered, tucking the phone between my shoulder and ear as I arranged presentation notes on my desk. A potential client wanted to hear more about my boutique marketing approach, the kind of work I'd built without a single favor from my family. As I spoke, my gaze flicked to the wall calendar behind my desk. Where once the months had been cluttered with obligations, birthdays I celebrated alone, holidays where I arrived bearing gifts and left with wounds, now there were entries entirely of my choosing. Half marathon in August. Photography workshop in September. A week in Montana just because I'd always wanted to see big sky country. When the call ended, I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence settle around me. The cottage, once a symbol of their control, had become my sanctuary. And in that quiet, I realized, they no longer occupied any room in my mind that I didn't permit. The life I was living now was built without their permission, their approval, or their presence. And it was more mine than anything had ever been. The mail arrived with its usual soft shuffle through the brass slot in my front door. I sifted through business correspondence, a few personal notes, and then my hand froze. A thick cream envelope. My name written in flowing calligraphy. For a heartbeat, my stomach dropped. A reflex I hadn't felt in months. It was another wedding invitation. My cousin Lila this time. I ran my finger along the embossed edge, remembering the last time an envelope like this had landed in my hands. How it had carried disappointment disguised as celebration. The date looked correct. The RSVP card even had a handwritten note. "It wouldn't be the same without you, Naomi. Please come." The old me would have dropped everything. Bought the perfect gift. practiced smiling through questions about my single status and childless life. Instead, I reached for my calendar. The wedding weekend overlapped perfectly with my photography retreat in Maine. A trip I'd booked months ago, one I'd been counting down to with genuine excitement. I selected a fresh card from my desk drawer and wrote a note in my own looping script. "I'll be away, but I wish you both a lifetime of joy." I'd send a gift. Not to buy approval, but because giving freely without expectation was something I valued now. That evening, Aunt Lucille was the first to arrive for dinner, bringing her famous apple crumble. Thomas followed, carrying a bottle of wine he'd been saving. Jenna came last, apologizing for being late from court, her laughter filling my kitchen. As we sat around my dining table, the air was warm with food, wine, and something deeper, the quiet certainty that this was family too. The kind you choose. 1 year, Thomas said, raising his glass once we were all seated. 1 year of boundaries that could hold off an army. To finding family in unexpected places, Aunt Lucille added, her eyes crinkling at the corners. And to the strength it takes to start over, Jenna finished. The clink of our glasses was followed by laughter that bubbled up from somewhere deep inside me. Rusty at first, but real. Later, after the dishes were cleared and my guests had gone, I carried my wine glass into my study. The moonlight spilled across my desk, illuminating the small wooden box where I kept my father's letters. Some were sharp with guilt, others dripping with veiled demands. Most had been attempts to pull me back into a role I no longer played. But the newest one, the one I'd received last week, was different. "I failed you," it read. "You deserved better." No excuses. No bargaining. Just those 2 sentences, written in his unmistakable hand. I placed it gently in the box, neither displaying it proudly nor destroying it in anger. It was part of the story, nothing more. Beside it sat a brochure for a mentoring program I'd been invited to join, helping young women navigate the pitfalls of their early careers. Beneath that, my travel itinerary for Portugal, a trip I'd dreamed of since college. Both represented a life built entirely on my terms. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the quiet hum of contentment in my chest. Healing, I was learning, wasn't always about reconciliation. Sometimes it was about peace. The kind that comes when you no longer feel the need to prove your worth to anyone. The Portugal itinerary sat beneath my fingertips, its promise of unfamiliar streets and ocean breezes pulling at me. I traced the bold dates, picturing myself wandering through sunlit plazas, tasting foods whose names I couldn't yet pronounce, photographing faces I'd never seen before. A year ago I would have hesitated. I would have asked myself, but what if they need me? Now the only question that mattered was, do I want this? I sipped the last of my wine, letting the quiet of the lake house wrap around me. In the past, quiet had been suffocating, a reminder of absence. Now it was an ally. On the wall across from me, the photographs told my story better than any family album ever had. Mountains kissed by dawn. Markets alive with color. A child's unguarded smile in a rainstorm. These weren't trophies. They were proof of life lived on my own terms. I thought of Aunt Lucille's words. Some people can't see what's right in front of them. She'd been right. My parents had never truly seen me, and I had wasted years trying to force their gaze. The truth was simpler than I'd ever allowed myself to believe. Family wasn't blood or obligation or a last name written in matching ink. Family was the people who showed up without needing something in return. The ones who didn't demand that you shrink to fit their comfort. I closed the travel folder and set it on top of my camera bag. Tomorrow I'd book the ticket to Lisbon. Not because I was running away from them, but because for the first time in my life, I was running toward me. The next morning, I was halfway through editing a client proposal when my phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email, subject line, urgent, family matter. The sender's name made my stomach tighten. I hesitated before opening it. "Naomi," it began, "I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I need your help. I don't know who else to turn to." She explained in halting sentences that Caleb's financial troubles had worsened. He'd drained their joint accounts and taken out loans in her name without telling her. She discovered eviction notices stuffed in a drawer unopened. "I don't want money," she wrote. I need someone who understands what it's like to stand across from him and see the truth." I leaned back, the cursor blinking in the empty reply box. A year ago, I would have rushed in without hesitation no matter the cost to me. But the weight of my boundaries pressed gently against that instinct, reminding me why I'd built them. I forwarded the email to my attorney with a short note. Advise her to get her own legal representation. I can't get involved directly. My finger hovered over the send button for a moment before I clicked it. It wasn't cruelty, it was self-preservation. An hour later, I shut down my laptop and walked outside. The lake was still, the air crisp. I lifted my camera, focusing on the light breaking across the water's surface. For once, the only thing in my frame was what I chose to see. The rest could stay outside the picture. 3 weeks later, I stepped off the plane into the warm, honeyed light of Lisbon. The air smelled faintly of salt and roasted chestnuts from the street vendors lined along the cobblestone sidewalks. The city was alive in a way that felt almost defiant. Every building splashed with color, every street corner humming with music or laughter. I let myself get lost on purpose, wandering through narrow alleyways where laundry swayed overhead like banners. In a small cafe tucked between two tiled buildings, I ordered a pastel de nata and a tiny espresso. The waiter set them down with a smile that didn't ask for anything in return. I lingered there, notebook open, jotting down fragments of ideas for campaigns, sketches of strangers I'd passed, thoughts I hadn't had space for in years. That night, from the balcony of my rented apartment, I looked out over the city. The Tagus River shimmered under the moonlight, and in the distance, church bells marked the hour. Back home, my absence would no doubt be noticed. Maybe even discussed in tones dripping with judgment. The difference now was simple: I didn't care. This trip wasn't an escape. It was proof. Proof that life could be beautiful without the constant weight of trying to earn a seat at a table where the invitation was always conditional. The next morning, I booked a last-minute train ride to Porto just because I could. For the first time in my adult life, my decisions weren't filtered through how will they react. The only question was, what do I want next? When I returned home 2 weeks later, the lake house was exactly as I'd left it. Sunlight spilling across the wooden floors, the faint scent of lavender from the sachet Aunt Lucille had tucked into my linen closet. I set my suitcase by the door, kicked off my shoes, and noticed a small stack of mail waiting on my desk. Most of it was routine: bills, catalogs, a postcard from Jenna, who'd taken her first vacation in years. But at the bottom was an envelope with my father's handwriting. This one was different. The paper was thinner, the ink slightly smudged, as though he'd written it in haste. I sat down, resting my fingers on the unbroken seal. For a moment, I considered tossing it into the wooden box with the others, unopened. But something, curiosity maybe, made me tear it open. The letter was short. Naomi, your mother's health isn't what it used to be. I'm not asking for money. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just thought you should know. There was no signature, no flourish. Just those few lines. I folded it carefully, placing it in the box with the rest. I didn't rush to the phone. I didn't book a flight. Instead, I stood on the deck overlooking the lake, the late afternoon sun turning the water to liquid gold. I thought about what was in my control and what wasn't. If this was a door, I didn't know yet whether I'd ever walk through it. But for now, it could stay closed. I'd learned there was power in choosing when, or if, to answer a knock. The possibility came a month later, wrapped in an innocuous email from a local arts council. I'd been invited to display my photography at their annual gala. A formal event, black tie, the kind of gathering that drew every notable name in the community. Halfway down the email, my eyes caught on a list of confirmed patrons. There they were. My parents. For a moment, my pulse quickened, that old, instinctive panic stirring like a ghost. I could already picture it. Their carefully curated smiles, the whispers that would ripple when we occupied the same room for the first time in over a year. I closed my laptop and walked to the window. The lake was calm, mirroring the autumn sky. I thought about declining. But then I remembered. This was my work being celebrated, my art filling the walls, my name on the program. I wasn't going to let their presence turn my night into a retreat. When the evening arrived, I stepped into the gallery wearing a deep emerald gown, camera in hand, my photographs mounted in proud symmetry along the walls. Conversations flowed, champagne glasses clinked, and for nearly an hour I didn't see them. Until I did. They stood near the far wall, my mother's hair pinned in the same elegant twist, my father's arm lightly resting at her back. Their eyes found me. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the urge to shrink. I nodded once in polite acknowledgement, then turned back to the circle of guests praising my work. The rest of the night was mine. It felt like crossing a threshold I didn't even know I'd been approaching. The gala wound down just after midnight. The last guests drifted toward the coat check, their laughter echoing through the marble lobby. I stayed behind, gathering my framed prints, running my fingertips over the smooth edges of the work I'd created, work no one could take from me. As I lifted the final photograph from the wall, I sensed movement behind me. Naomi. It was my father's voice, quieter than I remembered, stripped of its usual authority. My mother stood beside him, her posture stiff, her eyes unreadable. "We just wanted to say," he paused, searching for the words. "Your work is impressive." It wasn't an apology. Not really. But it also wasn't nothing. I let the silence stretch until it became its own answer. Then I gave a small nod. "Thank you for coming." I turned back to packing the last frame, the conversation ending on my terms. Outside, the night air was crisp, the city lights scattering across the lake in 1,000 shimmering fragments. Thomas was waiting at the curb, leaning against his car, 2 steaming cups of coffee in hand. "How'd it go?" he asked, handing me one. I took a sip, feeling the warmth spread through my chest. It went exactly the way it needed to. We drove in comfortable silence, the road unfolding ahead of us. Somewhere behind me, in that gallery, a version of myself I no longer recognized had finally been left behind. In her place was someone who no longer sought permission to belong. Someone who understood that her worth was never theirs to decide. And as the lake house lights came into view, I realized the story wasn't about what I'd lost. It was about everything I'd chosen to keep.